You know what? I will get you guys to do a thing and listeners can do it too. Just fold your arms over your chest for me, like cross your arms. And now cross your arms the other way,
Mm.
like reverse the hands. And for listeners, they've all just looked down at their arms like they're trying to figure out where their arms are and how it works. And I bet listeners
It's a
have done the
puzzle.
same thing.
Welcome back to Amy and I'm Amy Matthews, and I am here today with Abby Guy
Hi,
and Millie Heffernan.
that's me.
And we're all meeting on Ghana land today, in beautiful Ghana land. I am in the city at Tantania, Adelaide, and I am by Karawura Parry and the River Redgum Forest. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to their rich tradition of storytelling here on the Adelaide Plains. And I'd also like to extend those respects to any First Nations people listening today. We are really lucky, so it's YA month, and I feel like we've had an incredible month because we get to talk to two different authors this month. Normally, we only do one interview. So we had the author of the book of the month on the pod last week, so we could kind of cheat. But today, we're really, really fortunate that we have Amie Kaufman for an interview. Had you guys read Amy's work before? I know Abby met Amy last year at a conference, right?
Yes, I met Amy last year at a conference and listened to Amy give a presentation on her research. And I was like, we simply must have Amy on the podcast. And then, yeah, Peyton and I were standing in like a stairwell and we were like, so I was like, do you reckon we were kind of talking to Amy and I was like, Peyton, do you reckon we can ask? Like I've never asked in person before. And it turned out great. So
Yeah, I started listening to I was doing some research to interview her and I started listening to some of her podcasts because she's got two. There's Amie Kaufman on writing and pub dates. And I just got sucked in yesterday and started listening to all the pods, all the writing advice, then their journeys through writing their books, Sarah and Kate. So yeah, she's certainly interesting to talk to and listen to. I'm gonna finish listening to all the writing advice ones. And
yeah.
you started reading,
I
Millie, and got
started reading
sucked
the
in.
books. I got straight into it and I haven't stopped. It's all I've been
Yeah.
listening to this week. I read Red Star Rebels and Ladies' Night this week. So I'm so excited to talk to her about them.
Yeah, I think I want to
Make
set
sure I
her
don't
work on
talk
my
too
course.
much. Make sure we ask her questions and I'm not just gushing about the books the whole time.
Yeah, love a fangirl. Anyway, thank you for joining us. And we're going to dive into our interview with New York Times and USA bestselling author Amie Kaufman. I should read her bio. I just realized I haven't done
Her
that.
bio, yes.
Okay, Amie Kaufman is a New York Times internationally best-selling author whose multi-award winning work is published in nearly 30 languages, which is quite an achievement.
Whoa.
I would love to actually look up all the foreign covers. That would be amazing, like all the different
I
territories.
love foreign
Oh,
covers.
me too.
Always
Well,
do
you're
the
a cover
fairies.
designer, so it makes sense for you. I love all book covers. I'm obsessed with like how weird they get to in different territories that you wouldn't know
Yeah.
they were the same book. Amie has degrees in history, literature, law and conflict resolution, and is currently doing her PhD in creative writing. One of us, one of and she hosts the podcast Amie Kaufman on Writing and Pub Dates. And her latest book, Red Star Rebels, which I would hold up except it's on my Kindle. And I
Me
don't
too.
have one of the fancy Kindles which has nice covers. It's all black and white. So, but look up Red Star Rebels. It was launched earlier this year. She's also the author of a whole series of YA sci-fi. So there's the Aurora Cycle, the Illuminae Files, Earthbound, Starbound. Oh, sorry, Unearthed and Starbound, and YA fantasy, including Ladies' Night with Megan Spooner, Isle of the Gods, The Heart of the World, The Other Side of the Sky, and she also writes middle grade fantasy. So she is very prolific in these amazing world building universes. So, anyway, jump on board and we'll talk to Amie Kaufman. All right, well, welcome today, Amie. I can't tell you how excited I am to talk to you. A, because you're like an amazing author, but also a few of my postgrads ran into you at the AAWP conference last year and came back and were like, "Oh my God, Amie is amazing. She's so nice. You have to talk to her." So I'm like been so
Oh,
excited to meet you.
oh, I thought I was going to be totally incognito at that conference. It did not occur to me that anyone in academia would have the faintest idea who I was. So I just sort of, yeah, meandered in and was like, baby's first paper, it's going to be great. And then yeah, met a whole bunch of people who did know who I was. And I was like, well, at least they're friendly faces in the audience.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I have
Yeah.
to say, I think universities are changing and there's more genre fiction now.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
look, I mean, compared to the first time I went round when I was doing my undergraduate and my initial postgraduate degrees, it's like two different worlds.
Yeah, there was nothing when I went through. Like you didn't do
I no.
any.
Look, when I enrolled in my arts degree, I enrolled in creative writing as a subject, and I got in, and it was made abundantly and upon reflection, fairly unkindly clear to me in my first tute that there would be no room for dragons or spaceships or any of the things that I was into, and that we would only be writing worthy things. And at one point, the phrase, "What do you think Germaine Greer would say to that?" was used to one of the students, clearly in an attempt to make her feel bad about the fact that she didn't know what Germaine Greer would say to that because she was
Yeah.
18 years old and she'd come to
Also,
learn.
maybe Jermaine likes some dragons. We don't
I mean,
know.
who
Who
knows?
knows?
But yeah, so I bounced out before the census date and went and studied, you know, I did pop fiction and I did medievalism and I did a bunch of other stuff and wrote great essays about Bond girls and had an amazing time. But it was delightful to come back this time round and discover, oh, all my people have shown up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
imagine if that had been my experience, I also would have bounced. Like,
Yeah.
there ain't no
I
way of
think
doing a whole degree and not talking about dragons for most of it. So,
no. Well, and the thing, like, I didn't sort of bounce in that way of sort of scuttling off with your tail between your legs. I was possibly too confident an 18-year-old. And I just looked around and went, oh, no, this looks like no fun. And just left. And, you know, I guess it's thanks to the people who didn't leave that it's now so
Yeah.
much better.
Yeah.
So all
And I
credit goes
think
to
when
them.
That's a
you're
good point.
when you're a voracious reader, it's really confusing too. Like I'm sure we all grew
Mm.
up in the library and
Yeah,
like inhaling books, and you're like, but I'm reading all these books, like they're all out there. So who's writing them?
really, right. And, you know, it really seems like other people are reading them too. They look kind of dog-eared when they come from the library. So it
Mm.
doesn't feel like I'm the only one who's into them.
So that's
You
a
do. You
nice.
sit in the class and you're like, these are
Yeah.
the popular genres. What is happening? Why are we not
I
being taught
mean,
to write them well?
look, there's a whole podcast to be done about, you know, why do kids stop reading and what would happen if we did piles of genre in school, but that's a different podcast, I
Yeah,
feel.
but that segues nicely into my first question, which was
Mm.
what were your gateway books when you were growing up? Like when you were in that middle grade YA territory, what were the books that you were obsessed with?
Ah, that's a great question. So I had this interesting sort of reading upbringing in that both my parents read a lot, but they didn't read genre fiction. So my mum read very widely. She read a lot of what I think today would be called women's fiction and literary fiction. And my dad read what I don't know what they're really called, but what I call Father's Day books. So, you know,
Yes, I know
um,
exactly the book. I can
yeah,
picture
like
it.
often
Mhm.
quite thoughtful and clever books, but you know, a
Yeah,
history
Mm.
of Cambridge spies, that kind
yeah.
of thing. And so I coming through, I was reading Babysitter's Club and all that sort of stuff. And my dad's solution to every problem was to buy me a Babysitter's Club book in the best way. You know,
Go,
bad
Dad.
day, feeling sick, someone mean to you at school, down to the shop, next Babysitter's Club book. I think he found a solution and he was like, I don't care if I'm a one-trick pony, this is going to work for me.
That's
And so I
amazing.
was reading those. But then when I was in grade six, he gave me, and I don't know why, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for Christmas.
Ah,
And they didn't see me till the 27th. And when I came out, my whole world had completely changed because now I knew about science fiction. And it was sort of like fantasy, but it was real, you know, like it was
yeah,
something that could
yeah.
happen in this world. And that was an important piece for me. And I think the other really important piece was I had this amazing librarian who told me that The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper was her desert island book when I was in grade six. And I remember thinking, well, Mrs. Amiot is a librarian, so she knows all of the books. So if this is her desert island book, it must be spectacular. So a few weeks later, I got my first ever gift voucher for my local bookshop from my friend Stacey. And down I went and presented it and said, hello, I would like The Dark is Rising, please. And it turned out there were five in the series, and they sold me the omnibus. And it took me probably 20 years to realize, you know, in that you learn, you hear things as a child, you know, oh, your dog has gone to a farm, and you just believe them. And then only as a grown up do you think, hang on a minute, I have logistics questions. But in this case, it took me about 20 years until I thought, there's absolutely no way that book voucher paid for a 5-book omnibus. There's
Oh.
no
That was going
way.
to be I was like,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no. I think the bookseller, and this is it's still my local bookshop today. I think the bookseller just gave it to me for whatever was on the voucher.
Aw,
I think she knew a moment when she saw one and she went for
Yeah.
it.
yeah,
And I read that book every day at Christmas. And
yeah.
from between, that and 20,000 Leagues, I was like away. It was sci-fi and fantasy all the way. I caught the flu, and my mother went off and got me audiobooks from the library, when you used to bring home cassettes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And she got me one of the Dragonriders of Pern books by Anne McCaffrey, our queen, the first woman to make the New York Times bestseller list for science fiction, the first woman to be named a Grand Master, incredible feminist forerunner of science fiction writing. And she got me sort of a random book out of the middle of the Pern series, and I was so in. I must have listened to it 4 or 5 times in a row. And then I went away and read the whole rest of the series. And then when I was 17, I discovered the internet and I discovered fan fiction. And that's the story of how I'm here today, is I started writing that fan fiction.
Wow, I read an article just yesterday about how the music you listen to between the ages of 13 and 18 kind
Hmm.
of forms your brain, and that you can't help
Completely.
but come back to that music through your life. And I was thinking
Yeah.
about, I bet you, like, just without even saying it, you could describe the covers of those books that were your first
Oh,
great loves, right? And the feel
yeah.
and smell the smell.
I could tell you who the cover artist was. It was Michael
Go for
Whelan.
it.
Like, I
Oh,
don't, yeah, it was a
wow.
fantastic artist called Michael Whelan. But yeah, obsessed with them, obsessed with them.
Yeah,
And I think they definitely did imprint. I mean, I have a 6-year-old who is deeply into 90s music because that's what my
that's
husband and
the
I imprinted
thing.
on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. She was big mad she didn't get to come see Oasis with us.
Oh, did you go? I
Oh,
went to that too. It was amazing. I had
It was
high hopes
fantastic.
and
Yeah.
it surpassed my high hopes. It
They,
was
they,
just,
look, I'm quite a basic Oasis fan. I went there for certain songs. They delivered them to me.
yeah,
I
it
left
was great.
satisfied.
And
Yep.
everyone was singing through the
Yep.
streets after. It was great. It
Just
was like a
beautiful.
oh.
unifying human moment.
Right. And couldn't we all use one or two of those?
So my next question was really about your writing
Yeah.
journey. So obviously
Mm.
you're a huge reader. When you
Yeah.
started reading that fan fiction, you started writing that fan fiction?
Oh, I read it before. Sorry, I wrote it before I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was writing it from minute one, and I mean, I think in a way it was just Anne McCaffrey's Pern was a very lucky fandom to have landed in, because she's one of the great world builders of all time, and she creates these, incredible multi-layered worlds with so much cause and effect, and so sort of these deeply layered societies that I think are really interesting. And at the time, what she was writing was so wildly ahead of its time. And, these days we read McCaffrey and we're like, I have some notes. But at the time, when no one else was, she was writing books that centered people of color, people with disabilities, queer people, women in leadership. She was doing it all. And she, if not perfectly by today's standards, then certainly in a very advanced way by the standard of the time she was
Yeah, and you
writing.
can't
And
expect people to transcend their time and moment more than they
well,
already do. Do you know, like it's
I mean, look,
amazing
I
when you
hope no
see.
one expects me to in the future. I hope, because I have no doubt that my child, my 6-year-old, as an adult, will look back and be like, Mum, you said what? Because I look back at
Uh,
my teenage years and I think, Amy, you said
yeah,
what? So, yeah,
I
I
I have
think,
young
Yeah.
adult, like mine are 19 and 21, and
hmm
they do that to me all the time. And I think
yeah,
I'm quite progressive, but now and then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's
yeah, no, I hear
my
that now.
cultural moment.
hmm Exactly. So, I think to judge her by, the water in which she was swimming, she was extraordinary. But her world building was just quite something. And I think world building is sort of one of the central pillars of what I do today. And I think that might be why
Yeah. So
I wrote it.
when you started out writing,
Mm.
that the YA, we've kind of been wrestling this month with sort of middle grade YA, adult
Mm.
fiction, crossover fiction. Do you think you just gravitated to writing a certain age of character and then the genre kind of, or like, is it YA when you set out writing it, or is that just
Mm.
a side effect of writing about younger people?
I mean, I think something can be, there's all the examples of books that can be about a younger person, but that aren't necessarily, a YA book. But I think for me, young adult literature is the literature of transformation. It's the literature of who am I and what place do I want in this world. And I find that very compelling to write about. And I also think that of all the people in our society, the teens are the ones to whom I feel sort of the most urgent pull to speak because look at what we're giving them.
Mm.
And I think that, I mean, the stats, particularly in recent years on how many people are reading YA, it's what one of the most recent ones I saw was 74% of YA purchases in the US were being made by adults,
Wow.
of which about two-thirds of those were for the adult in question. And most of them were sort of under the age of, say, 30, but they
Hmm.
were still reading well beyond sort of the YA, the quote unquote YA years. And I think there's something in there about the transformation because we're all constantly transforming ourselves.
Mm.
It's first day at school, or it is first day at school pickup, and all the other mums seem to know each other. So where do you stand and what do you do? Or, it's
Yeah.
first date or it's first date after divorce. And I don't remember how to be in this type of relationship with someone where you don't know each other yet. I'm only used to being in really comfortable long term, So
Yeah.
we're it's first day at school, it's first day on the job. Like we're all constantly remaking ourselves
Yeah.
and we're all constantly having that feeling. And so I think that's one of the reasons that YA ends up transcending its readership. But for me, ultimately, I am writing for that readership because that's that's who I want to be in a conversation with, I think.
Can't believe we nailed the question in 15 minutes. That's
So
crazy.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
done.
We're
We
gonna
can
go
all go
around
home
with this
now.
question
Tick.
all month. Done. That's amazing. That's such a good answer.
Hmm.
Like I feel like I have to go away and stew in the answer.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you remember being a teenager? And perhaps part of it is I vividly remember being a teenager. I
Yeah.
remember I have, and I know some people don't, but I have many detailed memories of conversations, of places that I was, of ways that I felt. I can remember particular classes at school. I can
Yeah.
remember particular social dilemmas. And I remember, thinking it all through and trying to work out what I was meant to be doing. And I was so lucky. I had a mum with whom I could strategize. I had a mum who was like, okay, let's unpack what's going on. Let's talk about it. Let's make a plan. And who sort of coached me and taught me through that stuff. And I think that was like her ability to do that was probably one of the sort of most important things that's ever happened in my life. And perhaps there's something in that in terms of what I'm now trying to do in my books that, you
Mm.
don't write to preach because no one wants to read a book
Yeah.
that you wrote to teach a lesson. You write to ask questions
Yeah.
and
Mm.
informing their own answers to the questions. Young readers shape themselves, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that's so strong in Ladies' Night is the female
Yeah.
mentors, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously she's got her dad too, and that the moments with her dad in the last like sort of chapters are so because I was sort of worried. I was like, oh, it does kind of feel, but the fact that she came back and they had that conversation was so beautiful. No
Yeah.
spoilers because you should
So
just
no,
read it.
no, but
Um,
we very deliberately made sure in Ladies' Night, a fiercely feminist novel, we were like,
fiercely.
we need a good man though, because,
Yes,
not in a
because you're
not all men
constantly
way,
disappointed
but
by the men, unfortunately, like
yeah,
life
exactly.
sometimes.
Well, we were like,
But
we've made our point, and let's also
yeah,
remember,
yeah,
you know,
there are some good ones, but
yeah.
the wonderful female role models, and like that's the bit where I
Mm.
cried at the end. All the women in the torches. That I just lost it because I was like, women.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I was very proud. There's a line in that chapter that I'm very proud of, the line about women's work. But
yeah,
we talked a lot because Meg and I often write stuff together that sort of queers the narrative. We've also done short stories, and we always try to ask ourselves when we're doing that, what changes when you queer the narrative? Because
mm,
I think there's this, the tendency to do it the easy way is to just gender flip one of the characters and say it's the same story, but now they're both dudes, or now they're both ladies, or now they're non-binary, and now they're whatever they are. But that's not that's not actually enough because, we do all have sort of different societal expectations and different upbringings and different approaches. And so when we wrote a love story between two women, we wanted to ask ourselves what changes when they're
yeah,
both women. You know, what does rescuing a damsel in distress look like when you're both women? Do you ask her how she'd like to be rescued instead of just charging in for a start?
Yep,
You
yep,
know, do you
yep.
communicate about it? Does she participate in it? Do
Yeah.
you rescue each other? And we thought a lot about that as we wrote that book.
I mean, that's why I was so chuffed by it. I read it after, because I read Red Star Rebels, which is so, I love sci-fi so much. And then I
Quite a
went into a
different
late,
book, though.
yeah,
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
so different. Went into ladies' night, because I'm always on the lookout for, sapphic lesbian books. And just from the get-go, it felt you can write love stories about women and they're fine and whatever. But from the second I started reading it, I was like, oh, this is a sapphic story. Like this feels right. It feels good.
Yeah.
I like you probably hear it a lot, but I wish it was a book that had been around when I was younger, like when I was a
Um,
teen. To have
that's
read this
why we
book as a
wrote it.
teen would have been like
I mean
amazing.
to yeah, look, I mean to go back to what we were talking about before, that is the one and only reason that we wrote it really was to be in conversation with the teens who need to read that book now and who might have a slightly easier version than both Meg and I did of this
Mm,
whole
Mm.
journey.
yeah.
I think for listeners who aren't familiar, it's basically A Knight's Tale, but all queer ladies. It's, a damsel who decides to rescue herself and a girl dressed as a knight, and it's also very anachronistic. They have croissants because why not?
Why not?
Yeah, I mean that
But
first tourney with the cheer, because I was kind of like getting the vibe of like, because I went in without reading anything about
mm,
it first. So I was like, oh, this is such a fun vibe. And then that first tourney with the cheerleaders, I went, oh, I see what you've done here. Yes, excellent.
yeah. Well, it was during lockdown, when we were all doing that sort of Netflix party thing where you would watch at the same time as other people. And Meg and I
Mhm.
watched A Knight's Tale because it was 20 years old. And then we both kind of looked at each other afterwards and went, on one hand, much of what we loved about it holds up. But on the other hand, it turns out we were not critical feminists 20 years ago. Because the women in this movie rarely have names and even less often have agency. So we were like, what if we continued to love it, but also we,
Yeah. What if
gave it
all
an
the cool
update?
characters were women?
Indeed.
But that leads into Amy's
Mm.
point about Red Star Rebels, inspired by Die Hard,
Oh,
and you
yeah,
can
the
see it through
films.
the book.
Mm.
Because I listened to you and Kate. I listened to some of your podcast about
Hmm.
I've lost the term, pub
Pub
dates it's called.
dates.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's right. And yeah, so for those of you not familiar, what I liked, because I've also had the On Writing podcast, and then this one
Hmm.
is you and Kate sort of tracking your journeys, writing books, publishing books,
Yeah, we think of it
releasing the
as like
books.
DVD extras.
Yeah, and it was
Yes.
Oh
amazing
yeah.
just listening to you guys talking about Red Star Rebels. And as soon as you did the gets, I was like, oh, this is, when they tell you to pitch your book and do the log line,
Hmm.
I was like, you have got that down. Because like when you say A Knight's Tale, but all women, or
Yeah.
you said Red Star Rebels was, I liked the one when you said if you were pitching it to a younger audience would be,
Yeah, so when I'm
it,
being a grown-up, I say it's like The Martian meets Die
yeah.
Hard. And when I'm being a less of
Uh,
a grown-up, I say it's like The Martian meets Home Alone.
Just so
Which
good.
my
that's
US
so
editor doesn't
true.
like that one because she's like, Amy, I just don't think, it makes it sound too young. And I'm like, yeah, I think they're gonna figure
Yeah.
out real quick it's not too young. I think it's gonna be fine.
And it's the humor of it. And it's also because in that episode you talked a lot about speed. And I was going
Mm,
to ask you about when you use those movie comparisons, clearly you're thinking a lot about plotting and pacing. And
mm,
you had this lovely moment where you talked about the moments of connection, that you've got this, it's quite a tight little book that's really pacey, that just
yeah.
grabs you from the beginning. And like I said, I was up till 2 in the morning and I was eventually, I was like, I've got to get up in the morning, I've got to put it down. Um, but then you were talking about the importance of finding the quiet moments in those
Yeah.
pacey books. So I was wondering if you could talk about
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to sort of have, I mean, the light and shadow, among other things. I think back to when we were editing Illuminae, one of my earlier books, which is sort of extremely rich in action. It's, a lot of tension. And I remember an editor talking to us about what she called the nervous giggle. And the importance of the nervous giggle that, you can't just keep winding that rubber band tighter and tighter and tighter endlessly. You've got to
Yep.
let a little slack in every so often. Otherwise, it just, the tension stops working. When
Yeah.
everything's an 11, nothing's an 11. And so that was I've had a few lessons from editors over the years that have really gone on to flavor everything else I've done, and that was one of them. Another one, hot tip, was from my very first ever editor who said, Amie, never say somehow unless the character themselves doesn't know how it's happened, and that's the point. Don't say I somehow scramble up the wall. You're just highlighting that it was really difficult to do and it doesn't really make sense that they've done it. Just say I scramble up the wall. Somehow
Yeah,
is only for when they are meant to be confused. And I was like, I
that
have to
is
listen to that.
really good
That is a
advice.
good
That
tip.
That's
right?
really
I
good
know.
advice.
Yeah,
I'm very
it's
guilty of that. My God.
All
well, no,
those
I mean, yeah, you
modifiers.
put them in the draft and take them out in the edit. But
That's
yeah, that
right.
one stuck with me. But the nervous giggle stuck with me. And so in Red Star Rebels, it's like it's very much inspired by movies like Die Hard and Speed and these mile a minute action movies. But the
Mhm.
challenge that you want to, well, that I anyway wanted to take up in a book like that was, okay, the whole book takes place in 8 hours. We're trapped on a Martian base. We've got a very small environment that we're in. We have to keep moving constantly. No one has time to really think through their decisions. No one has time to really process what's going on. How do I create the sense of a genuinely meaningful relationship arising in the middle of
Yeah.
this, and how
Mm.
do I create space for the characters to really reflect on what's brought them there? Because on one hand, it's a mile a minute action movie, have
Mm.
fun book. And on the other hand, because it's science fiction, there's also a deep question at its heart. It's also a book about, this question we need to ask ourselves right now, like yesterday, about how shall we go to space? Like, do we
Yeah.
go
Mm.
together for all mankind, or do we let the tech bros do it and slap their
Yeah.
logos all over the nearest planets? Because
Yeah.
absent a
Mm-hmm.
conscious decision, it's going to be option two, which I don't think is going to go great. But, you know, both each of the characters kind of represents one of those views. And so I need time for them to slow down and reflect on that. I need time for
Mm.
their relationship to build. And I need you to not feel like we were speeding down the highway and I just ripped the handbrake on and jolted you out of the action. So it's one of those books that I think, what I wanted was just for it to be a really fun romp that you pick it up and you end up
Yeah.
reading way too late and you have a fabulous time. But there's a lot of craft that goes into it, because what I've actually got to do is every time I find a place that I want to slow down and have one of those moments, it's got to do double or triple duty. It's also got to
Mm.
be advancing
Mm.
the plot. It's also got to be teaching us about the world. There's a bunch of other things that it needs to achieve at the same time. So it's, and a lot of that's in the edit, and some of it's really annoyingly, I think, just sort of an instinctive thing
Yeah.
that when you've edited enough books, you begin to learn how to
Yeah.
make it
And
better
when
the
you've
first
read, I
time.
think when you've read a lot of books and watched a lot of films,
Yeah.
because when you those the film comparisons, I think film is really good for showing you how to economically do those moments, because it really
Yes.
is about processing. You need your character to process what's
Yeah.
happening to them a little bit.
Yeah.
I was
And
actually
my
thinking,
tendency. Sorry, no, go on, Millie.
oh, I was just gonna say, I love that you call it the nervous giggle because it's really similar to a concept in Miyazaki films called, I think it's called Ma. Ooh,
Hmm.
I'll have to double check that. But basically, in those scenes in Miyazaki films, like the Ghibli films,
Hmm.
when just before the big battle, they'll have a scene where like rain is falling on the town or something. And it's
Hmm.
about having that quiet moment before the huge battle because you can't be constantly at 11. You have to show
Yeah.
the stakes as well in those quiet moments. And I just thought, oh my
Yeah.
God, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, for sure, for sure. I often think about, yeah, what's literally called the night before the battle scene, which
Mm,
is, as you're coming out of Act Two into Act Three and you're about to, kind of launch into the non-stop Act Three action. Act Three needs to represent kind of, who the character was at the start of the book and everything that they've learned since. And you got to give them that minute to synthesize everything that
mm,
they've learned so that it's a conscious choice the way they launch
Yeah.
into
mm.
Act Three. So yeah, the sometimes this stuff feels like, you ask a centipede, how do you walk with
Yeah.
100 feet? And as soon as the centipede thinks about it, she can't. But
That's such a good
yeah.
metaphor for it, because you're right. Like there's so many things that once you've got the experience you've got that you're doing organically, that when you start out, you have to think about so much,
Yeah.
which was another of your podcasts that I have earmarked to share with my
Hmm.
first years later in the year. Because you wrote in on writing, you had this great episode. I think it's your last one about the levels of conscious writing.
Yeah,
which just,
yeah,
I've never heard anybody put it so beautifully before. So I was
yeah.
wondering if you could
I
sum it up
think
here a little bit, because it was so good about how you don't operate at the top level of complete conscious choice all the
no,
time.
and you shouldn't. No. Okay, so the idea very briefly, uh, you know what? I will get you guys to do a thing and listeners can do it too. Just fold your arms over your chest for me, like cross your arms. And now cross your arms the other way,
Mhm.
like reverse the hands. And for listeners, they've all just looked down at their arms like they're trying to figure out where their arms are and how it works. And I bet listeners
It's a
have done the
puzzle.
same thing.
Feels
Yeah,
weird now.
right. But so one of them was automatic, and the other one you sort of more or less got there, but you had to think about it. And that's what we mean when we talk about conscious and unconscious competence. So the idea is we've all got four levels at something that we're learning to be good at. First of all, you've got let me think, unconscious incompetence. So you are no good at it, and you don't even know that you're no good at it. These are the people you meet who say, I'll write a book one day, with
Yeah.
absolute confidence and
Yep.
zero experience.
Usually your
Um,
boss, in my experience.
and
Usually one of my bosses will be like, I want to write a fantasy novel. It's like,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, or your friend's parents, people to whom you can't simply say,
Yeah.
"Okay, let's see you
Yeah.
try." But and the thing is, I always try to be kind because in some aspect of my life where I am unconscious of it, I am equally incompetent.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
It's
fair.
we're
Yep.
all like that.
Yeah.
But then next you move into conscious incompetence. And that's when a lot of people fall away because that's when you realize how much there is to learn and how much you don't know. And it's that horrible, it's that feeling when you embark upon something and then you begin to realize, oh no, this is way bigger than I thought it was, and I don't know how
Yeah.
to do
This is about
any of it.
year three of the PhD, I think.
Oh, right? It's horrible. And, and a lot of people stop at that point because it's a very unpleasant experience. And sometimes stopping's the right, like if the eventual goal doesn't mean enough to you, then it's probably a
Mm.
great time to
Yeah.
stop and redirect
Yeah.
your resources. But if you keep going, you move into conscious competence, which is now you can do it. This is you crossing your arms the other way. You can do it, but you have to think about it. You got
Yeah.
to, there's a conscious effort involved. And then finally, you move into unconscious competence, which is you do it crossing your arms the normal way. You do it without even thinking about it. It is just something that you do. And I think people often think that unconscious competence is the pinnacle of the pyramid and it's where we should be all the time. And
Mm.
I mean, that would be great, except there's no one who's there the whole time. So what you actually need is the ability to shift around between
Mm.
those options.
Yep.
When I'm stuck on something, and as I was last night when I was writing a chapter on my new draft, and I was like, this chapter just feels like I've sort of slowed down the action and they're just having a big talk about what their plan is. That's not great. And so I shift back into my conscious competence and I think,
Yeah.
okay, what do I know about writing scenes like this? I know an interesting setting might make it more interesting. I know that if I can layer some personal stakes into the proposals they're making for this plan, that will make it more interesting as well. I
Mm.
know that if it's shorter, it will be better. I know that if I can create some kind of time urgency, it will be better.
Mm.
Could I have that announcement about them all needing to, be within their lockdown within 5 minutes, and so now they've got to go. Like what can I do to?
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
go back into that, and I work through all of my kind of conscious competence stuff. And then hopefully I get to go into the next scene and write with unconscious competence because I
Mm.
can just do the next thing that I'm doing. But I think being able to shift back and forth is
Yeah.
very powerful
Yeah.
and not seeing that as a strength, seeing that as, oh, I've got a toolbox and I can use it is very helpful. That's why I created the whole Amie Kaufman on writing podcast. It's like 45 lessons that are intended to help people build a toolbox so that
Yeah.
Yeah.
they can think, oh, why isn't the end of this chapter working? I will go and listen to the 10-minute episode called How to End a Chapter, and I will
Yeah.
add to my
Yeah.
Yep.
toolbox
Yeah.
so that next time I need it, I can consciously, competently do it.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter how many books you've written. That's so helpful.
Oh,
It's so
no.
helpful.
No, oh my, well, I mean, the thing is, I think it shouldn't matter how many books you've written because if you start thinking, oh, I never really need to do that anymore,
Mm.
like, congratulations, you've stopped pushing yourself. You've
Yeah.
stopped
Yeah.
growing and learning, and you've decided I'm just going to happily sit at this level. And like, I guess if that's a choice that you're making on purpose, then I guess, go with God. But I think most of the time you want to be pushing yourself and learning and improving, which means you are constantly going to have those moments of conscious incompetence where you go, oh
Mm.
no, which I was doing just the other day when 'cause the book I'm writing at the moment, I sold to my editor basically on one unhinged paragraph of pitch. And she was like, sounds great. I know you'll nail it. Off you go. And then I went away and thought, oh, what have I done? I, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah.
Mm.
I've always dug out before. I'll be fine.
And
Might
also,
just
I
be
would hope
coaching
that every
myself
book
right
is
now.
different too, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
I
I
would
remember
hope that
one.
people aren't going through the motions, with every book.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I remember fairly early in my career, a very good friend of mine said to me, "Look, with any luck, These Broken Stars will be the worst book you ever publish." And for a moment, I was so insulted at the idea that it could be the worst anything. And then I realized that he was saying, "Well, hopefully every book gets better and better and
Yeah.
better." So
Yeah.
through no fault of its own, one hopes. I was like,
Yes. What a beautiful sentiment, actually, when I think about it.
Right, yeah, no, yeah, I will stand down.
Amy,
Yeah.
you said you were writing a draft at the moment. How are you
Yes.
juggling writing while also doing a PhD? Because I feel like writing just the novel for my PhD is stressful.
How am I, Abby? Well, your question presupposes that I am
Yeah.
successfully juggling. No, it's okay. I have two really great supervisors, one of whom, I mean, they're both academics, but one of whom is also a novelist, and one of whom focuses more on the academic side. And I said to them very early on, I'm sort of going to be a bit like the Eye of Sauron. I will go away and I will write a different book because that is how I pay my mortgage, and I must do that. And then when the Eye of Sauron swings back upon the PhD, I will work furiously for a couple of months and throw chapters and drafts and all kinds of things at you. And then I will go quiet again for some months, and you need to not worry about it. And they've both been amazing at working within that framework with me. So it means that sometimes I go away and I write a book.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I come back and I madly write my critical for a month or two. So it's for me, the novel is for my PhD is sort of a chance to do something a bit fun and interesting because, I've written however many, I don't know, 25 novels already. So like it's not that I'm wondering if I can write a novel. It's what can I do with it that's a bit fun or a bit
Yeah.
Mm.
different to what I've done before. And I mean, the critical is the classic example of biting off way more than I could chew and only realizing when I am well into it that I have, in fact, chosen as just that there's far too much here and what on earth am I going to do? But, I think that I was saying to them towards the end of last year, I said, okay, I know it's time to finish up my critical now because I'm just ready to put it in a cannon and fire it into the sun. And the supervisor who's more on the academic side became concerned and started giving me like a pep talk about like it's okay and everyone feels this way and don't stress. And the one who's a novelist went, oh no, 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 she's just recognizing a stage. It's okay. And I said, oh yes, with every novel I write, there comes a moment when
Yeah.
I want to put it in a cannon and fire it into the sun. All that means is it's time to step on it. It's time to go because my patience is now running down. So
Yeah.
Would you
It
like
so
to
helps
talk
how
yes.
you
about,
work.
yeah, would you like to talk about your research at all?
I
Like
would love to know what it
different
is.
about this.
Yeah. That's a very dangerous question to ask any academic, isn't
We
it?
can always edit it down, Amy. It's
Yeah,
fine.
I'll give you the quick version. So, when I was coming into it, I thought, what is my unique contribution? What is the thing that I can do that other people can't? And I think one of the things that I have that other people don't is I'm a working published author as well as an academic. And that gives me access to authors in a way that, a lot of academics sort of just don't have and can't achieve. And, there's a lot of like kind of fun, insider status questions around that, of course. But I tend to come down on the side that sort of ultimately, if you can't access them any other way, then you just acknowledge that you're an insider and that that's going to influence the way you think about it and you get in there because particularly in YA academia, I and I hope this isn't too spicy a thing to say. I think most people would agree with me. I don't feel that we write about a really wide range of authors. I think that you often see the same authors covered repeatedly, and that
Yep.
the more that happens, the more it happens, because
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
they're the ones that there are articles about and sources about.
I
And
think that
so
happens, yeah, in every single genre. That
this
you
is what I'm
develop,
saying.
you develop the canon that then everyone just sticks with.
Just sticks with
Yeah.
exactly. And like I say, it's not a swipe at anyone. I think it's just, as you say, the way it tends to work everywhere. And in YA, that canon that we've developed is super white. Like, whoo, super white.
Mm.
And so I wondered if there was something I could do there, somewhere I could, if being a good ally is sort of doing some of the footwork on behalf of the people you're trying to help, what could I do to introduce some women of color into our canon and give people, stuff that they can work with? Um, there's another thing that I sort of felt was a feature of a lot of YA academic writing, and this is again not the fault of the academics, is not a lot of direct contact with the writers, because the writers are often quite suspicious and or don't have time
Mm.
or don't know how an interview like that will be used. And so,
Yeah, and I think, sorry to interrupt, but going
yeah.
back to your very early point about being at
Mm.
university, I think a lot of writers, their experience of
Uh-huh.
literary studies is that they don't belong.
I totally, totally agree. And I mean, I also now understand on the other side of it that there's ethics approval if you want to talk to them.
Yes, there is.
A process that makes you want to put yourself into a cannon and fire yourself into the sun. But we forged on because I was committed by that point. And so I'm using the genre worlds as a theoretical framework. And I am doing interview work with four women of color, with Saba Tahir, with Marie Lu, with Donielle Clayton, and with Lisa Fuller, who's an Australian, and kind of talking to each of them about what has been their experience of writing speculative fiction in a way that has brought their own race and culture and background into that fiction,
Mhm.
and what has their experience been with publishing, what has their experience been with readers, and if the idea of a genre world, which is Kim Wilkins and Beth Driscoll and Lisa Fletcher, and it's an amazing book and I think everyone should read it, their idea is that they take a whole book to say this. Watch me do it in 30 seconds and butcher it a bit, but here we go. Is that it's this nexus where people come together, people who produce books, people who write books, people who read books, like all of the different sort of social and industrial aspects of bookmaking all come together in a genre world. And there is membership to a genre world. In order to be in a genre world, you have to know stuff. And, it might be knowing the tropes, it might be knowing the scandals, it might be knowing the names, it might be knowing who went before. But, for instance, I'm not a part of the crime genre world. And if I read a crime novel, I'm going to go, oh, cool detective. He's so incisive. And someone who is part of it is going to see the nods to Sherlock Holmes and the nods to Miss Marple and the nods to the detectives that I don't even know to cite because I'm not part of that world. And they're going to see how it interplays and they're going to understand how a trope just got subverted, whereas I'm just going to be surprised by who done it. So inside our genre world of YA speculative fiction, there's all this kind of knowledge about how diversity works and how race gets treated. And I wanted to talk to my four interviewees about how they have shifted the definitions inside our genre world and how they've moved things on. And I think they're all incredible and they've all had great success. And obviously, it has not been a necessarily easy path for all of them. And it's been a very thoughtfully considered path for all of them. None of them just decided to rock up and write a book. They all had goals when they did. So I spoke to them, before I, interviewed them to tell them what I was doing and what I hoped to achieve. And it's one of those areas, any area that talks about any kind of, diversity, is you just want to be really careful that you don't give a quotable quote because, you can do your best to express something in good faith and you don't do a good job, and
Mm.
next thing, because this is the water in which we all swim, you're getting jumped on. So it's
Mhm.
an area where I think a lot of people are quite hesitant to give interviews. And also, there's just their time is precious. And
Yeah.
so I think I was perhaps the academic who they felt they could trust with those conversations. Someone cried in every single one of my interviews, often me.
Oh.
Oh,
They were incredibly heartfelt. They were incredibly deep and thoughtful and these authors are just giants in their field and working so consciously to change the world that they're in. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of present this argument that there's a series of sort of call and responses going on inside our world, and that each response speaks to the call that came before it and sets up a new call. And so we're responding to what was in the past. We're trying to change the present. We're trying to lay down runway for who's coming in the future. Um, And, I hope it works, but I also think that probably one of the greatest pieces of value in my thesis will be that I'm going to publish all four interviews in full as
Wow.
appendices
Yeah, cool.
so that other academics can, because I'm just taking, these are all like hour-long interviews, I'm just
Mm.
taking little pieces out of them.
Mm.
And I'm hoping that other academics will pick these interviews up and use them. And because they're these incredible, from the horse's mouth resources, that will shift the canon because suddenly it won't be so hard to write about these amazing women. And I hope other
Mm.
people will do it. So,
Yeah, amazing. Wow.
What a
How did
beautiful
you find,
project.
did
yeah.
you do any stat like how did you do the interviews? Like, did you look into a methodology for interviewing or did you just
So I'm a bit of an odd duck when it comes to that stuff. What part of my academic background is that I've got a master's degree in conflict resolution, and I worked as a mediator for about a decade. So
so
being
lots of
in
experience
lots of
of
experience, yeah,
yeah.
being in conversation with people and working out how to draw out what's going on is sort of one of my skill sets.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I also, genre world itself, the theory, uh, I think creates this really nice framework. And so I sort of asked questions about different aspects of the genre world. And so I had a sort of a spine of like everyone got the same questions in some respects. And then I asked sort of follow-up questions that personalized things or that, spoke to their specific books and specific choices that they'd made in their
Yeah.
books because they took quite different approaches to race. So I wanted to sort of ask about those.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
Wow, I
There's
want
so
to read
much
it
to think
right
about.
now.
Yeah.
Ah,
Oh, I want you to read it right now because that would mean it was
It's
done.
done.
it's
And
done.
it's not. But it will be by the middle of the
Right.
year. It'll be out of my life. And,
Oh, look at that. Same
you
Very
timing
know,
as
nice.
Abby, both of you, middle of the
yeah,
year.
Mm.
one
Yeah.
way or another.
I also want to
So,
fire it into the sun.
mhm. But then I get to be like a doctor of young adult literature and feminism and science fiction. And
Which is pretty cool. That is
that's,
pretty cool.
I can go home after that. Yeah, I'll be very happy.
Going back to science fiction and fantasy, and I
Yes.
had a couple more questions around. You mentioned world building, and when you started reading Jules Verne and
Mm-hmm.
other things, that world building was one of the things you're attracted to. This
Mm-hmm.
is like basic kind of question, but I'm actually obsessed with it. Is like, is there a difference between world building for fantasy and world building for science fiction? Because obviously, when you bring Mars into the equation, there's like some real world
Oh, physics, man.
physics.
Yeah, that doesn't
Yeah.
change. Yeah. Look, there's less difference than you would think. Um, there's just different challenges. So, I mean, with sci-fi, obviously the science is the science is the science, and you want to get it right. So you've got to play by particular rules. And I think there's often this feeling that in fantasy it's going to be easier because you get to make up the rules.
But
But
then you have to make up the
then you have to
rules.
make
Then
up
you have
the
to make it.
Yeah.
rules. And making up a magic system is no joke. Again, there's a whole Amie Kaufman a writing episode about it if anyone wants my 10-minute speech on how to do it. But
Excellent.
it's really genuinely challenging. And I think for me, it's sort of, sometimes you go to a restaurant and there's a giant menu in front of you and you think, oh, I wish they'd just give me a one page. And
Yeah,
I
or
would
just
just,
bring me food. Just
right?
mega
Like to go
station
to
it.
restaurants where they give you a giant menu and it's just
Hmm.
photos of all the food, but like none of it
Yeah.
makes sense. And I'm like, but give me
Hmm.
the name and like the price.
Help
Like,
me out.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
But
don't want gallery.
no, but when you go when you get that one pager and it's got 10 things and you're like, well, I'll just have to make this work. That can
Yeah.
actually make your life a lot easier. Whereas fantasy, there's so many options. And so, you know, that
So
can
the
be
guidelines are helpful. Are
mm,
you so do you
yeah.
enjoy science? You enjoy science reading?
I'm not very good at it, which is hilarious because I said one of the country's leading science fiction authors. But look, I find it really interesting, but I do not have a scientific brain. Like I
Yeah.
can't read hard science
Yeah.
papers very successfully. I find them quite difficult to digest. I wasn't great at science at school. I was quite literally busy writing fan fiction during my science classes, is
Yeah.
what was going on. Uh,
And that paid off, so we approve.
Look, it turned out fine. But I find like conceptual science extremely interesting.
Yeah.
The stuff that is sort of written in a challenging way, but without the equations. So, and I'm also really lucky that, one of my fact checkers is an ex-NASA engineer.
Helpful.
And yeah, and she's really great at communications. She's really great at explaining how things work.
So
So,
is that why on one of the pods you mentioned that you'd been
mm,
to NASA and got a tour?
yes.
So
Yeah,
is
I've been a
that
few
how?
times.
Wow,
Yeah,
tell
so
me more
in
about this.
it was one of the most single validating moments of my
I was gonna say
entire
that's so cool.
life.
Yeah.
No,
So cool.
I got an email from an engineer at NASA who said, "Oh, we read your book Illuminae in our book club and you didn't make mistakes." And I was like, I gotta
Oh, best
stop
email
writing
Oh my
ever.
forever now,
God.
right? It was the pinnacle of
Done. We're
my life.
done.
It
What do you
really
mean? You
was.
are a scientist.
Right? And I mean, I felt like saying, well, you should have seen the first draft. And when we gave it to the astrophysicist, we got back like 25 pages of typed notes on our errors. Many of those notes were all caps and quite rightly so. But we got 10 years, a lot to unlearn from movies. But we got better and better. And so I emailed her back and was like, that delights me. And she said, if you're ever in, California, and I was like, I shall make it my business to be in California. So next time I was on tour in the States, I let her know I was coming, and she took a bunch of us backstage for a tour, which was really fun. And I got to do it a few times over the years, which was just so
So
it's
cool.
this hilarious thing where all of the engineers are going, oh, wow, you guys are best-selling authors. And we're going, but you're actual rocket
I
scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
know,
we're
right?
at
You work
NASA.
at NASA.
So, right. And everyone in that conversation, in the most beautiful way, thinks they're getting the best end of the bargain.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
Okay.
delightful. And a lot of them spoke about how growing up either reading science fiction or watching Star Trek and that sort of thing had played a really big role in them being there. And so I think, they deeply inspire us with what they do. And it's really
Mm.
fun to think, well, maybe we're giving them their next generation by
Mm.
creating these
Yeah.
stories. That's a beautiful circle. I know.
That's
I
so
had one sort of a
Yeah.
question, sort of to do with
Mm.
genre a little bit, because obviously very sci-fi heavy, and then Ladies' Night is more sort of historical fantasy.
Mm.
But I was thinking this as I was reading the books, how genre fiction like sci-fi and fantasy really lend themselves to YA, because I think not that regular YA fiction isn't beautiful and good, but there's something about the high stakes of sci-fi and fantasy that really reflect the feelings going on in a teenager and make it
Yeah, the
feel
scale.
make it feel
Yeah.
real, as opposed to being in the real world where you're like, I feel like the world is ending, but I know it's not, sort of, look,
Well,
world
it could
politics,
be.
but
Yeah.
Yeah, at
but
the moment.
whereas in sci-fi it's like, no, we
Mm.
actually are stuck in a base on Mars, and this actually is possibly
Ish.
life-threatening.
Yeah.
Matches the feelings that you feel when you're a teenager.
Yeah, I think
Just
so.
wondered if you had thoughts on that, since you are
Yeah.
so like sci-fi genre heavy.
I look, I think that in a healthy ecosystem we have all of the things because I always say that I admire people who write contempt stuff set in the real world because if I want it to feel like the world's ending, I can blow up a space station. They've got to make it feel like the world's ending because someone walked down the corridor at school past you and chose not to make eye contact.
Mm,
And that they have to make that feel as big as I get to make it feel with an explosion. And,
yeah.
I think teen readers need both. I think
Mm,
that as they're figuring stuff out, having stuff that feels like it could be at their school, and, I'm thinking of stuff like, authors like Amy Doak or, who writes the amazing Eleanor Jones books
mm,
or, Ellie Marnie's early crime books, which is they probably straddle a little bit because, the kids are solving crimes, which the average teenager
yeah.
doesn't get to do.
We all weren't
But
doing those as teens. We weren't solving crimes.
I'm not allowed to speak about my past detective career, but I think they need stuff that is sort of set in their own setting and their own
Mm,
oh God, I was about to say milieu. You can tell I've been drafting academic work. Stop it, Amy. But I think they need that stuff because often that is the stuff that lets you know you're not the only one who's feeling
yeah.
those feelings. But I also think that getting to work those feelings out and have those adventures in a much bigger setting,
Mm,
is sort of a way to step outside it and think about them. We always sort of say that, like with Star Trek, you can watch an episode and go, oh no, those green people are being terrible to those blue people. And because you are neither green nor blue, you can just take a look at it, have a think
Yeah.
about it.
yeah.
And I think that teenagers are doing a lot of taking a look at stuff and having a think about it. And I think that
Mm,
sci-fi and fantasy can kind of offer them both the experience of doing something epic, which is just at any age, just fun to do,
hmm.
but can also kind of offer them those chances to step outside a bit.
Yeah.
So I think I last year I was one of the judges on the Australian Prime Minister's Award. I was judging the YA category, and it led me to read. I mean, I read almost everything that was published in YA last year, including a lot of books that I perhaps might not otherwise have picked up. In some cases because I didn't think they would be my cup of tea, and in fact they were. And in other cases just because I hadn't heard about them, or because, when I'm not attempting to inhale an entire year's worth of literature in one go, there's more of a limit to how much I can actually read.
Yeah.
But, it really left me feeling that yeah, in a healthy, balanced diet, you want a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed with the state of Australian YA as
Yeah.
well.
That's good
Just
to hear.
wow. Yeah,
Yeah. One of the
so much good
questions
stuff.
one of our other co-hosts had
Mm.
popped in our run sheet to ask you was around being an Australian writer and writing for an Australian audience versus
Mm.
writing, because you obviously do tours here, you do tours overseas, you have
Yep.
overseas audiences.
Yeah.
I guess that point you just made there made me want to ask you, do you think there's
Mm.
something special about the community in Australia or the way you came
Oh
up? Because
boy.
I feel like there's something very warm and wonderful about Australian writing communities.
There is something very special here. They know it overseas too. They often ask me what's in the water. Like, why are we overproducing so many? They're
Yeah.
like, just, big country, but there's not that many of you. How are you producing this many YA writers of this caliber? And I think a part of that is actually community for sure. I think, everyone turns out to each other's launches. Everybody, and if someone is listening and thinking, oh, I wish I was a part of that, literally just turn up to the book launches
Yeah.
is my answer
Mm.
to that. Because for so I've been doing it long enough now that there are so many people I know now who started out just coming along to whatever book launch was happening in Melbourne
Mm.
where I am, and the first time they didn't know anyone, and they just said hi to a few people and said, I'm here by myself, I don't know anyone, and someone inevitably goes, okay, great, come talk with us, because you've already got this thing in common, you're all book people and it's fine.
Yeah.
Mm.
And over the years, you watch them do that and then build friendships, and then you watch them get an agent and you watch them get a book deal, and then you get to go to their book launch. And it's so beautiful. It's just, yeah, I think we have a really nurturing community here. And I think, sometimes elsewhere I see this kind of sense of competition that I don't
Mm.
see in Australia because, at risk of sounding a bit, obvious, like reading a book is not a bucket list item. People don't read a book and then go, fabulous, I've read a book. I shall
I
now
will
learn to
never read
skydive.
any other YA book ever.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
want to. Now I've got to learn to knit and go skydiving. I've got a bucket list of, like people read a book and go, fabulous, I would like another book, please.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's we all lift each other up. And I think there's just a real understanding of that here in Australia. Everyone really cheers for
Yeah.
everyone else.
Do you think as well there's the fact that your work translates around the world is partly also because Australians have like it's a real melting pot for other cultures. Like we
Yeah.
absorb UK culture, US culture,
For
European
sure, for
culture.
sure. Yeah, I certainly grew up watching shows from all over the place on
Yeah.
TV. And so I think you have enough crossover
Mm.
that, every so often you encounter little vocab differences. Like I found out when I was copy editing Red Star Rebels that apparently, if I say to you, Fab, I'll see you then, I'll put it in my diary. You know exactly what that means. Apparently, to an American, a diary is only like a personal journal,
So
not
it's
a
Oh.
calendar.
calendar. Put in my
Calendar.
calendar.
So I've been telling publishing people for like 15 years that I'm journaling about them, apparently.
Oh no.
I mean, like, I know they figure it out from context, but, it was still a little moment of just like, oh,
The
okay,
one
you
that
don't say
blew my
that.
mind was that Americans don't have kettles generally. That
No.
they don't make
They
their tea in a
boil,
kettle.
yeah, and then make it in the microwave.
Microwave.
Yeah. It's
Well,
so yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a combination of low voltage and lack of tea culture, but
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah.
It's like those little things that trip you
God,
up.
how do you live without it? Yeah, I strongly agree. But yeah, it's and every so often I get a little editorial comment being like, "Oh, great futuristic slang," and I'm like, "Which bit?" I that was me speaking as an Australian,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
don't,
yeah. Is
I
a
don't know.
bogan a kind of alien?
I mean, yes, for real, for real. I do in the sci-fi I'm writing at the moment, I'm because, we all know that the greatest challenge in any form of writing is coming up with good futuristic swear words. Like it can't be done. So I'm trying far out as a swear word in my current book
Oh.
because I'm like, it's got a satisfying F.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
The Americans don't say it, so maybe I can make far out of
I can
things.
see it. I can see it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, watch
Far
this space. I'm
out.
trying.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I love it.
Cool.
yeah.
We're actually out of time somehow, even though I still
Oh
have all
my
these
God.
questions I could ask you.
Oh,
We're
that's
almost
my special
overtime, I
gift.
would say.
My
Whoops.
special gift is rambling. I'm sorry.
It's not rambling, it's all
No.
fascinating. It's amazing. Like,
All good.
I
seriously, I
know.
started listening to your podcast and then kept listening to your
I
podcast.
need to go listen to the podcast now.
Oh, I find it's funny
Oh.
on Amie Kaufman on writing. It's got a very large listenership, but a good portion of that is people who just are having a bit of a stressful time and need to calm down,
Oh, because
or
you've got
go to
such a
sleep.
lovely voice, you do. And your
Yeah.
on-air voice is just like you could do radio, like you could do one
It's
of those
very like
ABC radio shows.
I can see it being ASMR.
There's a lot of people who have a very parasocial relationship with my voice who use it just to, an episode. They're like, I hope it's not rude, but I use an episode to go to sleep. But I'm like, I am so happy to be able to help you with that.
Yeah, how
I
nice.
I have things that calm me down too. So if I can be yours, then
I
what a
don't have
win.
time to listen to the podcast. I have to start the Aurora cycle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us, Amy. It's been a
Oh, thank you for
pleasure.
having me.
Maybe we could have you back on when your PhD work is published and talk
Oh,
through the book. I would love to talk
yeah.
more about that.
I would love to do that. Yes, you won't shut me up, as you've just
Awesome.
learned.
That's
Excellent.
awesome. We love
That's
that.
what we want.
All
Anyway,
right.
thank you for joining us for YMA month. And
Yeah.
everyone, don't forget that our book of the month is Eggshell by Olivia de Silva. And we will see you next week for our live book club. So thank you, Amy. And
Thank
thanks, Abby.
you.
Thanks, Millie.